oral essay, question number 3, prompt number 5. Prompt is asking, what's the difference between resistance and endurance training? Why is it that when we do resistance training, we get larger muscles, but for endurance training, we don't see that, but we see that we are less prone to fatigue? Why is that? Well, before we get into the differences, let's talk about common ground. Resistance training and endurance training are both principled under overload and specificity. Overload meaning how much load, how much weight, how much are we going out of our normality, out of homeostasis? How hard are we working? And specificity is what is the modality of the training stimulus? What are we working towards? What is our goal? It's also dependent on frequency, intensity, and duration. How hard are we working? How long are we working? And how many days of the week are we working? So let's first start with endurance training. Endurance training, we're going to need aerobic energy systems, ETC Krebs cycle. We're going to need an energy system to facilitate and keep up with our demands of oxygen and muscle contraction and ATP use that we need for longer duration. So we're going to use type 1 muscle fibers. A big adaptations that we use for endurance training is muscle fiber types, mitochondrial biogenesis, increasing antioxidants, and increasing capillary density. Well, type 1 muscle fiber type, we are going to increase our mitochondria. We're increasing mitochondria so that we can use that for ETC, so that we can make more ATP, so that we can meet the demands that for our body, so that we can uphold what we're trying to perform. We will also have increase in capillaries so that it has less distance that blood has, or nutrients has to travel so that it will diffuse. It has less room to get lost, less travel distance so that it can perform better, perform more up to our standard that we need for our work. Let's see. Type 1 is a slow twitch muscle type fiber. Not meaning that is less efficient, but it means that the ATPase is working stronger. It's not as fast. So that means while we're working, we are not cocking and pivot the myosin to actin site faster, but we're actually using ATPase less so that we're actually having a stronger contraction. We're using it less, we're having less contractions, we're having less ATP that we have to use to unbind the myosin head. So we'll be less prone to fatigue, we're saving our energy. We also have, we're going to prioritize fat use. We're going to maximize fat use because we're going to be at a state of less intensity but more duration. It's harder to get to a state where we're just primarily using fats, but that's what we're going to be at with Krebs and ETC. We're going to be at that state where we need longer duration and more of that. So we're actually going to be saving our carbohydrates. We're going to be glucose sparing through GLUT4, GLUT4. Less resistance, more endurance, fatigue resistant. That is through endurance training. Now let's go to resistance training. So it's the opposite. Resistance training, we're going to have like more explosive, and we're not going to be as long duration, but we're going to have higher intensity. So we're going to be using PCR and glycolysis. So we're going to be using type 2 fibers more. We're going to have a decrease in blood, but we're going to have an increase in size and power. Hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is the increase in sarcomere size, in cell size. So we're actually going to be building sarcomeres on top of each other. That's how we get gains. So we're going to be increasing hypertrophy, and we're going to also be increasing the contractile proteins. We're going to be making more sarcomeres. So to increase contractile proteins, we're going to have to start off with transcription factors. So that means we're going intracellular. We're going to be making new proteins from RNA. We're transcribing. That in turn is going to activate mechanoreceptors, the signal for stress on the muscle, on the sarcomere, which is what's going to cause, eventually, it's going to cause the activation of mTOR, which is a free radical, very important because it increases transcription factors and it increases protein synthesis. Increases protein synthesis, increases transcription factors, which actually is a positive feedback because we have to go back to transcription factors to go back to making RNA. Positive feedback loop. We also have neural adaptations. It's the fastest way to adapt. It's through satellite cells. So let's say, for example, you are trying to throw a paper ball into a wastebasket. You miss the first time. Well, you try again and you make it, or you get closer to it. That is neural adaptation. Because of your first try, your body has already adapted neurally. You know, okay, I need to throw harder. I need to activate more of my muscle. You need to contract more. I need to aim more to the right, so I need to move my wrist. You already neurally adapted to it. And overall, endurance training, if you have endurance training and resistance training and you work out the exact number of times, 60 minutes for both, you will have more contractions in endurance training than resistance training. That's just how the fact of the matter is. Say you are doing deadlifts, and for 15 minutes, you're going to have less reps. You're going to have less reps because you're going to be under a load. You're going to be working more on your form. But because of this energy system, you're going to also have an intermediate point of rest as well, so that you can go back to working. However, for endurance training, you're going to consistently work. Say instead of deadlifting, you're going to be running on the treadmill just for 15 minutes. That's a much more repetitive movement. You're going to be contracting more. You're going to have more range of motion. It's just the nature of resistance versus endurance training. Those are the big differences. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk.